Perhaps opens the recording. Yes. So welcome everybody to this already ninth meeting in the seminar series Environmental History Today, which since the end of 2023 has been introducing the regions of European Society for Environmental History. So each month we will have one region, and today I'm glad to present you France. My name is Kathy Lindström. I am the chair of the Council of Regional Representatives that is organizing this seminar series, but the meeting will then from now on be chaired by Elsa Devienne, who is the French regional representative and the person to go to if you want to talk about what's going on in the French environmental history. So Elsa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this French session of the webinar hosted by the European Society for Environmental History. I am French, which is why I'm the France representative for ESEH, but actually I'm based in the UK and I work on the US. I am an assistant professor in US history and environmental history at Northumbria University in the northeast of England. All right, and I'm the representative for ESEH. One thing, Kathy, that I think would be good to think about for next year is actually, it would be great if we could have two representatives from two different countries work on one session, because I think in the end, we tend to reproduce this kind of like siloed research cultures by doing this. I'm really happy today that actually we bring together four new voices, as I called them, four new French voices on environmental history. But it'd be great if those four researchers were maybe meeting researchers, early career researchers from Croatia, from Sweden, from Spain, etc. Just thinking through this as I was preparing this. But anyway, I'm really, really glad to be hosting this. When I was asked to host this session for France, I went to the inclusivity group, working group of the RUCH, which is the French branch of the ESEH, because I thought that this was an important opportunity to do more of the work what we're doing with this working group that is working on inclusivity in environmental history in France, that is promoting and the voices of people who have not necessarily been so much promoted so far in French environmental history, or not as much, or should be more promoted. And not just, I'm not here just talking about women, but also people from the global majority, or people who are adjuncting, do not have yet a full permanent jobs, and also people who are new to research, which is why we thought, okay, why not have a session where we celebrate those new voices, those early career researchers, and make sure we have gender parity, but also celebrate another woman environmental historian who's done a lot for European environmental history and French environmental history, and that is Geneviève Massard-Guibault, who's here actually with us today. So I'm really, really glad she's there. And the point was to kind of like create a sort of bridge between generations. Geneviève was instrumental in getting, in creating the European Society for Environmental History and spreading the environmental history in France. She was also a pioneer on the history of pollution and environmental justice. And I was going to mention the two books you wrote, Geneviève, one with Richard Roger, which you guys published in 2011 on environmental and social justice in the city, historical perspectives. Very little had been done on these topics, at least in history before then. And of course, your book, Histoire de la pollution industrielle, History of Industrial Pollution, France, 1789-1914, which you published in 2010. And so I thought, how about we celebrate Geneviève's pioneering work since she retired recently, and also hear what's going on these themes of industrial pollution and environmental justice in France today, and not just by people working on France. I also thought, I'm going to invite Eugénie because she works on the US just like I was. because let's remember that, what's being done in environmental history in France is not just about France, it's about many other places in the world. And then final plug, and then I'll let the young researchers speak. We also wanted to celebrate this book, which was published last year, honoring Geneviève's very important work, not just as a researcher, but also as a leader, as a mentor. She's mentored me and many others, and really has done the kind of, the kind of leading that I hope, and the kind of leader that I hope one day to be. And just to mention a few things about this collective book, which I co-edited with many other people: Renaud Bécaud, Patrick Fournier, Stéphane Friou, Charles-François Matisse, and Judith Brainhorn. If you're interested, there are 2 excellent chapters in this book on the histories of pollution, one by Thomas Leroux on writing the histories of pollutions in the 21st century, and another one by Olivier Saint-Hilaire on the AZF accident, and this industrial catastrophe in Toulouse. And so, yeah, check it out. Le chemin, la rive et l'usine, faire de l'histoire environnementale avec Geneviève Massard-Guibault is the title. Now, I think I'm done with all the job I had to do, and the only job I have left is to introduce our wonderful speakers for today. I'll introduce them one after the other. So one, and then they'll speak, and then another introduction, etc. Just because that way, hopefully, everyone will remember who is who. And we're going to start with Eugénie, Clément, Picos. Oh. Moment of... Picos. I should have known, really, because the rest of your bio will give out why it should be Picos. Eugénie is a French-Spanish anthropologist, and since 2016, she's been working on the Navajo Nation, will water protectors, environmental activists, and farmers around the topics of food sovereignty, environmental justice, and political ecology. She is defending her dissertation at the end of December 2024, so next month, at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, the Social School for Advanced Studies in Paris. And Eugénie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Elsa. Thanks for this opportunity. And also thanks to the Rouge team for inviting me to this seminar. Elsa, could you please put on the first slide? So as you said, since 2016, I work with Navajo environmental activists who call themselves protectors or water protectors, land defenders. So I spent a total of like 2 years doing ethnographic work. Okay. So as you can see on the first slide.
Sorry, just a second, Eugénie. I'm a bit late on this, but I am getting there. Sorry, here we go. And I'm sharing now. Forgot that I had this job. Here we go.
You're perfect. So as you can see, like it's kind of like to situate the Navajo Nation within the United States, so it's in the southwest of the USA, okay? So it's located on the Colorado Plateau between the states of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And according to the latest census in 2020, the Navajo Nation has around 400,000 members, and more than half of whom do not live on the reservation, okay? The majority of them live outside in southwestern cities, such as Phoenix, Flagstaff, Albuquerque, and Los Angeles, where economic opportunities are far greater than on the reservation. So for the past century, the Navajo Nation has experienced intense extractivism on its territory, with oil, coal, and uranium mines, and more recently, fracking and methane extraction. So most of the mines have closed, but they haven't been cleaned, okay? And the economy of the Navajo Nation still depends on the exploitation of its soils. If you could please put slide 2, so we have like a deeper understanding of the geography of the Navajo Nation and how it's organized, okay?
That's it.
All right. So here, with the time that is given to me, I will briefly present some of the environmental justice underway among Navajo conservationists, starting with a short ethnographic vignette. So shouts of "To'ei ina, water is life" are heard over and over again. A group of a dozen of young people, aged 18 to 30, block one of the halls of the Navajo Museum in Window Rock, the capital of the Navajo Nation. They want to prevent a meeting between the Navajo tribal government and the Arizona Senator, John McCain. McCain has come to negotiate the Navajo Nation's water rights and obtain a share of their water table for his state. So the protesters are singing and beating the drums. They are surrounded by both tribal and state police. So the site is emblematic, housing the original 1868 treaty signed with the federal government. The youth chase Senator McCain's car, shouting, "Get the hell out of our lands!" The senator ended up leaving the scene at full speed, exfiltrated. Thanks to, or because of, these protesters, the meeting could not take place. I did not witness this scene, which took place in August 2014. It was reported to me in 2017 by those present that day. Some of these young people had since become farmers and were still campaigning for water protection and a just transition away from fossil fuels. This event was a fabulous memory for them, which they recounted to me with a big, mischievous smile, like a sort of contemporary Western, where, quote unquote, merciless savage Indians had driven the powerful politician off the land. For the individuals and organizations I have lived with, water is a core motivation and concern. This 2014 event was a battle won in the conflict for sovereignty of the resources. In fact, the nation's average daily water consumption per person is between 10 and 100 gallons a day, and 40% do not have access to running water. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed these inequalities in access to water. At the height of the pandemic, Navajos living without running water were unable to wash their hands or comply with safety standards. The result was catastrophic. In April 2020, the nation became the most COVID-contaminated area in the world. And before that, water scarcity was also characterized by an overabundance of plastic. And by this, I mean the abundance of disposable crockery, water bottles, and so on. Where plastic dominates, water is lacking. This plastic presence has an economic cost. Plastics means a disruption of direct links between water and the Navajo through the presence of a third party, a private company, profiting from these absences and selling water through plastic bottles. Due to the lack of infrastructure, this same plastic ends up in illegal dumps along the reservation. It's in this context that the August 2014 Navajo Nation protest against McCain must be understood. For Indigenous researcher Melanie Yassi and Kucha Rising Boldly, water is seen as an ancestor and as a parent with agency within the web of life, deserving respect, care, and protection. The author named Indigenous protector Indigenous freedom fighters, challenging the organization of power within American society. For this Indigenous feminist, the disappearance and/or murder of Indigenous women is directly linked to the presence of men's camps where mining companies, or the one doing fracking, host their employees, exploiting body territories. And I borrow this concept of body territory from Maya Kekchi feminist Lorena Cabral, who links defense of the body territory and the territory earth in the face of the specific violence suffered by Indigenous women. For Latin American feminists, body territories are linked to physical, historical, social, cultural, and epistemic territories. And in December 2022, the Canadian House of Commons issued a report on this subject entitled "Responding to the Call for Justice," addressing violence against Indigenous women and girls in the context of resource development projects. So the report unequivocally establishes the links between disappearances of indigenous women, cisgender and transgender girls, and the presence of mining camps. For the activists I work with, protecting water, territories, and women's bodies are inextricably linked. From this perspective, it's not surprising that indigenous environmental justice movements in the US have been initiated by women's collective and led by women. Most of my contacts are women and non-binary people. They oppose the idea of bodies and territories to be conquered and dominated. The indigenous feminism sees the exploitation of land and water as an extension of capitalism and colonialism. As Jan Iñasi, a leading Navajo environmental justice figure, reminded us in 2016 in Standing Rock, we can say our water, our land are safe until the bodies of our women are safe, because everything about this system and how it functions threatens the reproductive creativity of women. And this won't happen until we liberate a pathway for women that allow us to be free in our bodies. A transition from being social activists to looking at the larger systemic problems and how capitalism and globalization were institutionalized around the globe on the exploitation of women. And if you can put the last slide, yes. I'm sorry, I forget.
Yes. No,
just the last one, so we have kind of a picture of the activism that is going on.
Yeah.
And so in conclusion, I'd like to point out that indigenous feminists do not categorize women as naturally more inclined towards protecting quote unquote nature against a quote unquote culture that exploits them, but rather that they focus on the patriarchal and colonial structuring of the American society in which body territories are in their eyes associated with objects to be conquered and violated. So this constitutes the basis of their environmental justice. And the right to water, the conflicts it provokes in the ontologies associated with it by activists, enable us to analyze the political, legal, and economic stakes, and both at local, national, and international levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being exactly on time. I really appreciate it, Eugénie. If you have questions specifically for Eugénie, please keep them to the chat for now, because we are going to move now to... Oh, wait, I said I would start with Yaël and I started with Eugénie. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to the original order we had agreed on. And now we're going to get to Yaël. That's because my bios were not in the same order. Apologies for this, Eugénie. Yaël Gagnepain, Dr. Yaël Gagnepain, actually. Oh, and I'm going to pin your...
Hello, everyone. I try to share my slides also, but...
There we go. I'm going to introduce you while you figure this out, Yaël. Is that okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So Dr. Yaël Gagnepain, he is a doctor, defended his PhD just last year at the University of Lille. Congratulations again. On the pollution and flooding caused by the discharges of Roubaix's textile industry in the 19th and 20th century. He's currently lecturing at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, where he leads the teaching strand on the environment, or on environmental history. I wasn't quite sure I understood that. Anyway, Yaël, are you okay, or do you want me to help you?
Yeah, I want you to help me. Can you share my slide? Because I
yes.
you and I cannot manage it.
Absolutely, I can do that. Just give me
Thank you, Elsa.
A second. In my emails. Here we go.
So hello everyone. The short presentation I'm going to give here is the fruit of my doctoral research that I carried out at the University of Lille, and so I would like to thank you warmly for giving me the opportunity to present my research in this context. And indeed, during my doctoral studies, I was fortunate enough to take part in the the scientific activities of the RUCH and the ESEH. And these two associations have been very supportive and formative. So thank you again to give me this opportunity to talk to you. And also, I would also like to thank, I have this opportunity to thank Geneviève Mazar-Guilbault, whose work inspired me and who on several occasions took the time to discuss my work, even though she had no supervisory responsibility upon me. So let's begin with my research. My research field, I've been the industry of the city of Roubaix, which is a city north of France, really close to Belgium, and which is infamous today for being one of the poorest of the country because it has been struck with deindustrialization. But that used to be one of the main industrial cities of the country back in the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. And so my research begins in the beginning of the 18th century, when the industrial development began in Roubaix and in the north of France in general. And so at this period, Roubaix was no more than a small provincial town whose economic activity was divided between agriculture and artisanal cloth making. And in the first half of the 19th century, an ambitious bourgeoisie of craftsmen imported steam engines and spinning machines from England. And this quickly transformed the town into the textile capital of France. Industry grew and diversified massively throughout the 19th century. You can switch the slide. So in the space of a century, the town's population increased 14-fold, and Roubaix alone produced up to 80% of the country's wool. So the historiography of the 1970s and 1980s, of course, focused on this Roubaix miracle, as they called it. Studying Roubaix was central to understand the industrial development of the region, which remained one of the most densely industrial region in France until the end of the 20th century. Sorry. However, historiography had never before examined the environmental determinants and obstacles encountered by this massive industrial development. So in my thesis, I tried to focus in the question of water and hydrography, because the hydrography inherited from the Ancien Regime was unable to supply the water needed for industrial development. So as a result, industrialists built a multitude of infrastructure to bring in the city large quantities of water from numerous neighboring watersheds. This included canalizing rivers, groundwater drilling, and dozens of kilometers of pipes to bring in water from distant rivers and from distant drillings. You can switch aside. In the second half of the century, of the 19th century, the industrialists controlled the town city council, and they entrusted the management of part of this water infrastructure to a municipal water department. And I show you here the quantities of water sold by this municipal service for selling water to the industries. So most of this water was used in 3 industrial processes: the steam engines for cleaning and combing raw wool, and for dyeing the textile. You can switch the slide. Downstream from Roubaix, so I'll show you here a little map of Roubaix and the sister town of Tourcoing, which was also really important for its textile industry, and all the hydrography that has been modified by the industrialists. So downstream from Roubaix flows a little river, which is called the Espierre, whose natural flow, I mean by natural, I mean before the industrial development. This flow varied between 2 and 10,000 cubic meters per day before the industrial activity began. And progressively, the tens of thousands of cubic meters that was grabbed and used daily by the factories, which, as I told you, that was grabbed in other watersheds. All this water was released untreated in this small river, increasing its flow tenfold. So, of course, in France and Belgium, because as you can see, the river is going really quickly in Belgium, voices were raised in opposition to these toxic discharges. Agricultural land was regularly flooded because the flow was increased tenfold, and this contaminating crops, and several surveys carried out in Belgium, so 10 kilometers after the city, showed that the estuary waters were more loaded with grease and ashes than those of the sewer collector downstream of big cities like Paris. So it was really, really contaminated. It was almost only industrial waters in this river. That was really dark and really toxic. This situation was such, you can switch the slide, the situation was such that the Belgian authorities repeatedly threatened to build a dam to flood Roubaix with the contaminated water of its factories. And I show you here 3 dam profiles considered by Belgium to flood the industrial city of Roubaix in this water. But of course, the French diplomatic service systematically succeeded in having these projects cancelled, promising that the industrialists would soon purify their waters. And yet, for almost a century, I would say from 1960 to from 1860 to 1940, industrialists used a variety of delaying tactics to avoid having to treat their water. The fact that polluted water quickly found its way to Belgium enabled industrialists to avoid having to pay the cost of treating their wastewater for much longer than they may have done if it was in the middle of France. You can switch the slide. From French residents living along the Estuary River, the municipality paid for the damages caused by the flooding, and between 1924 and 1939, so between the 2 World Wars, the commune of Roubaix paid 200,000 francs in compensation to avoid flooding being the subject of legal action. This saving on water purification costs was undoubtedly an important comparative advantage in the development of the city's production facilities. You can put the last slide. So in my research, I've tried to show you, I sought to ensure that the issue of industrial pollution was not divorced from that of the water resource control. I have sought to show that the right to monopolize the resource and the right to pollute are 2 facets of the same relationships towards the environment that industrialists have developed over the course of the century, and which has alienated the hydrographic destiny of an entire region to the needs of the industry and of the industrialists. This relationship with the environment was made possible by the industrialists' significant political investment in the municipal administration, which throughout the period always sought to accommodate the industrial interest. And I thank you for your attention. I'll put some articles I wrote on this topic on the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaël. Very impressive mapping you've done, like the drawing of the map. Very impressed. Next we have Dr. Louis Fagon. I'm going to switch the spotlight so that we can spotlight Louis. Here he is. Are you okay with using the slides, Louis?
I will try to share my screen.
Okay, so while I do this, I'm going to introduce you to everyone, if that's okay. So Dr. Louis Fagon is also a very recent PhD from the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, but I believe Yaël defended a week before him. So Yaël is our ancestor here. So he defended last year his dissertation, which focused on the nuclearization of the Rhône River from the 1970s to the 1990s. He's currently lecturing the École Normale Supérieure in Lyon. He's taught previously at Sciences Po Paris. And I believe, Louis, that you are the last PhD student that Geneviève supervised. Is that true, Louis?
Not the last. There is still one. There is still Olivier Saint-Hilaire.
Okay.
Olivier Hilaire will defend his thesis on 29th of November.
And it is on industrial pollution as well, then.
It's, I have no idea how to translate. C'est le désobusage, a history of désobusage.
That's true.
If you can translate this, Elsa, I'd be grateful.
The removal of
the destruction of the First World War weapons, including their content, chemical contents, etc.
So the cleaning of that,
yes.
of those weapons from World War
Cleaning,
War.
not really appropriate. It's really polluting, but
yes.
Until today.
So désobusage. I'm asking for help from Google.
I don't think you will find.
Yeah, I think we need to come demining, I guess is the word that is
sort of demining,
yeah, that's a fascinating topic, but for now let's hear from Louis. The floor is yours, Louis.
Sorry, Louis, for interrupting.
No problem. Thank you very much. I will try not to be too long because I have a lot of slides to show you, but I'll try to explain two things I think are interesting about my work. I will try to show you step by step my research process, because I think it's an important part of my research on the nuclear industry along the Rhone River in France. And I think also it's a way to show how environmental history and its tools, and also very simple questions have guided me towards new archives, new materials, new findings, very interesting findings about nuclear energy. So first, I started with very simple questions. I just wondered, why are there so many nuclear power plants along a single river, the Rhone in France? Because you can't miss them if you have already been there. They are along the highway. You can see them from the train or from a plane, for example, where if you take off from Lyon, and they seem to be a part of the landscape. Here you can see all of them. So if you are an engineer, the answer is very simple. They are here because of the water. They use water to as a cooling water for the facilities, or to discharge radioactive effluents, heated water. But for historians, there are more questions. Why are they here, exactly where they are? And how did this development take place? So I asked a whole new questions. What are the local impacts? Are there debates about these impacts, especially regarding the water? And so I wanted to write a local history of nuclear power. I had to use other methods, other research methods, I think. And I didn't want to write another national history of nuclear energy in France, because in France and in many other countries, this history is told on a national scale. So I read especially Geneviève's work, and I wanted to apply the method she used, and she used in her writing, to study the nuclear industry just like any other industry, through its local impact, through the economic, social, political, environmental impact all together. And I wanted also to to draw inspiration from geography and their sensitivity to territories and to local scale. And that's what gave me the idea of using other materials following the river. But so I used local archives following the course of the river. You can see here the main archives I used in France, because I used all the files given for, sent from the national scale to the local authorities in order to build all these nuclear power plants. And I systematically looked for every information regarding nuclear power plants, projects, etc. At the same time, it was very interesting to discover that I was not alone working on this topic, because in Stockholm, there was a new group, Nuclear Waters, led by Per Exelius, who was working on this relation between water and nuclear power. And there was also another student, Alicia Goutin, just beginning to work on the same topic as I did on the Rhone, but on the Rhine. So it was very interesting to see the connection. I had no idea of this connection before. This turn also to the local archives was very interesting to see in other groups, such as Nuclear Spaces, for example. So I decided to work on these different archives, and I will try to summarize very quickly my main results. I think there are three main results that are interesting for environmental history, and I think beyond the history of industrial pollution, for the history of France and of nuclear power. First, in the 1950s, I showed that there is always tensions, always fights within what has been always seen as a nuclear state in France, one state, unified and trying to build as many nuclear power plants as possible. So I saw on the local level all the struggles between local authorities and nuclear agencies such as CEA, EDF, the main actors in France, and how they used the nuclear exceptionalism to avoid any control. For example, the local authorities try to control radioactivity just as any other pollution. But in the name of the nuclearity, such as Gabriel Hecht has shown, so this concept of the nuclear specificity, they were set aside. It was the same to control the opponents. They could have done it just like in any other industry. But because it was nuclear, it should be controlled by the nuclear industry itself. The second result I want to underline, just to summarize my work, is all these debates and these tensions within the actors in charge of the water quality during the 1970s. In fact, during the 1970s, the project of building nuclear power plants was massive in France, and especially along the Rhone. You can see here on the map. Here are all the built nuclear power plants and also the projects, abandoned projects along the river. And as you can see, it's like on every riverbank of the river. And so what I discovered are there were a lot of debates within the basin agency, among engineers in charge of the river, of the river quality or river pollution, because radioactive pollution and thermal pollution were the both sides of the same problem. The question of the limit of the nuclear limit of the river is very limited. Could we go too far by building too many power plants? And I think it's very important to connect these critics within state agencies with such critics in anti-nuclear movements, as you can see here on this slide. And finally, for the last part of my research in the 1980s and the 1990s, I tried to focus on the geographical aspect of of nuclear power plants and how the so-called nuclear territories, as the geographers call them, how they were built, however, historically negotiated and adapted to to show on maps where the impact of each nuclear power plants end. For example, there is always the same question: how far should we organize a public inquiry? Who takes a risk by living there? Who should be evacuated in case of an incident? And there are a lot of maps in these local archives that I try to use and to analyze here. Just to conclude very briefly, it's very interesting to see how these questions come back now with the launch of new nuclear projects in France. And as you can see, the problem of the water quality is always debated in 2023 when the chairman of nuclear French safety in France said we have to take the problem seriously. But it's interesting to see it was already debated during the 1970s. So thank you for your attention. I hope I was not too long.
No, it was perfect, Louis. And actually, it was also the perfect, I guess, conclusion to like what seems to have been those three presentations, very much focusing on the pollution of waters. So really, really interesting to think about this from Eugénie's work to Yaël to yours now, ending to the very present with this 2023 quote. So last for our presentations today, we have Lucile, sorry. Okay, trying to do too many things at the same time. Where are you? Where is Lucile?
I'm here. Maybe I can.
You're right next to me. That's why I couldn't find you.
I'm trying to share my PowerPoint.
Okay, so Lucile, I'm going to present you while you figure this out.
Okay.
Lucile just started her PhD dissertation last month, literally. So that's why I kept her for last. And so she started her dissertation a month ago at Sciences Po Paris, where she's researching the history of plastics, and more specifically, the history of plastic bags in France. Her master thesis was on the French Formica company, offering an economic and environmental history of the firm. She received a lot of prizes for that master thesis. Well done, Lucile, including a grant that is precious to my heart because it is the Ruche and Association Française d'Histoire Économique grant for that work that she is actually turning into a book, which is forthcoming later this year, I believe. Lucile?
I think it's coming out next week.
Next week. Well,
yes.
Congratulations, Lucile. So it will be in French, and it's a history of the French Formica company, which I think we can all relate to in France because every single person I know has had a Formica table in their kitchen at some point in their lives. My mom still has hers from the 70s. Here you go, Lucile. You have the floor.
Okay, so can you see my PowerPoint?
I can.
Yes. Okay, perfect. First and foremost, I would like to thank Elsa for inviting me to this European Society for Environmental History webinar. So I'm a PhD candidate in Economic and Environmental History at the Center for History at Sciences Po. And as such, I am interested in the history of plastics in 20th century France, especially. Yes, I'm just at the very beginning of my PhD. Therefore, instead of providing you with my PhD findings, which I do not have obviously yet, I wanted to inform you about the research approach I intend to adopt and which I have somehow already implemented in my master's thesis on a different scale, of course, but still. So a convenient starting point for this presentation is the historiographical void surrounding plastics so far. As to my knowledge, there is no comprehensive work on the history of plastics, except for a book by the American historian Jeffrey Michael. I have the book in my hands right now, and it is this is we have the same book, Elsa. It is a technical and mostly cultural history of plastics in the US in the 20th century. And this work dates back to the 1990s, so perhaps the time has come for researchers to re-examine plastics with a fresh eye in the light of environmental history. So I believe writing the history of plastics provides a valuable lens through which to reconsider the material history of the second half of the 20th century. And the emergence of plastics in domestic consumption and retailing represents a major material, social, and economic phenomenon. But environmental historians have also documented the change in pollution scale which occurred after the Second World War. And it is precisely this ambiguity of plastics between modernity and pollution, let's say, which makes them a convincing observatory of this multifaceted material transformation. So I dedicated my master's thesis to the history of the French Formica company. Formica is a plastic material which was produced as large panels in the company's factory in the Pyrenees in the Aude region in southern France from 1951 onwards. Formica furniture proved successful from the late 1950s and into the 1960s. And it was so successful that it came to symbolize the emerging consumer society and the access of the lower and middle classes who often purchase furniture on credit to domestic modernity. So the 1959 commercial you can see on the left of the screen is emblematic of the discourse surrounding the modernity and Formica. This plastic now enjoys an extremely positive image, which is fueled by nostalgia for a time of economic growth that came to an end with the crisis of the 1970s. So one of the historiographical questions my master supervisor and I asked ourselves was what place should environmental issues and the damage caused by the new consumer regime which triumphed after the Second World War be given within this sort of hegemonic narrative of material progress. And the results of my research on pollution in the broad sense in the Aude factory are twofold. First, the Formica industry is responsible for occupational illnesses linked to the industrial use of formol, causing eczema, causing cancer as well. And secondly, severe river pollution with phenol occurred in the Aude Upper Valley, which is as well a fishing reserve. And trout and river ecosystems were destroyed, leading to environmental controversies with ecologists and with fishers, such as in 1983. And at the factory, river pollution was a very well-known chronic concern. So, of course, there is still an enormous amount to be written about the history of Formica, and I do not claim to have covered it all. However, for the time being, as part of my PhD thesis, I am switching the object of my investigation. In fact, when we collectively dive into plastic pollution, we most often refer not to industrial pollution, but to waste pollution. That is to say, pollution that arises after the use of plastics. And plastics are indeed emblematic of the disposability paradigm, which gradually triumphed after the Second World War in France and throughout the world. And I am therefore devoting my PhD research to the history of the plastic bag in the broadest sense, including both the packaging of products in self-service stores and disposable shopping bags, which became commonplace slightly later at the end of the 1960s and in the 1970s. This brings me to the more experimental part of my presentation, because at this point I have way more questions than answers, obviously. What I at least know is that I intend to write an economic and environmental history of polyethylene in late 20th century France. Because the emergence of plastics is both the source of a shift in social and commercial practices in the consumer society and an essential geological landmark of human presence on Earth, as geologists, paleontologists, and other scientists have shown. So what is polyethylene? Well, it is a plastic, and it is a rather cheap plastic, and has become the more common plastic used in packaging. And it is precisely because it's so commonplace and omnipresent that I'm interested in it. And I have identified so far with my supervisors 3 investigation fields. First, how did the carbochemical, petrochemical, and plastics industries develop in France after the Second World War? For example, an area specialized in polyethylene extrusion is La Haute-Loire near Lyon, which became a plastic valley, the plastic bag capital. Oyonnax in France is also a very famous case. The second question is why and how were disposable packaging and single-use shopping bags imposed in retailing? And my hypothesis is that massive efforts were in fact required to impose plastics in retailing. And last but not least, when and how did disposability paradigm in consumer society emerge as an ecological issue? And on this specific subject, I defined several potential paths for reflection. So I would like to shed light on scientific research and activist movements. I should also investigate the regulation of single-use plastics in France and in Europe. And finally, I would like to dig into the industry reactions, which often leads to the stigmatization of individual behavior, and to end this inevitably programmatic and abstract presentation at this very early stage of my research. To end this presentation on a more concrete note, I wanted to show you, I will not show you, but I have translated the speech of Antoine Riboud, from a 1972 video. So at the time, he was the head of BSN, which later became Danone. This company, this food company, was packing its products in plastic materials such as polyethylene. And in the 1970s, he launched the Vacances Propres operation, which consisted of major beach cleaning campaigns to educate consumers who threw plastic waste on beaches carelessly, seemingly. And such a speech is highly instructive on the fact that manufacturers tend to blame the consumer for throwing away plastic waste. And it is also a way of denying the responsibility of manufacturers and the enormous economic interest of the plastic industry, which obviously go beyond the individual scale. And a similar dynamic has been shown in the United States, for example, in Bartow Elmore books on Coca-Cola capitalism with the NGO Keep America Beautiful. So this is therefore a huge issue that I'm tackling, namely the advent of plastic and the pollution it causes at every level, both upstream and downstream of its use. And obviously this program will be refined but it seems to me that plastic, whether Formica or the plastic bag, offers a rich perspective from which to revisit the history of consumer society in the light of environmental history. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Lucile. Can you please stop sharing your slides, Lucile? Thanks, and I will remove the spotlight. All right, thank you so much for this presentation. What's interesting, so I didn't realize when putting this together that all of you would be speaking in some ways about water pollution, actually. And what's interesting about plastic pollution, about water pollution linked to plastics, is that you can blame it on the consumers in ways that you cannot blame it in the case of nuclear power, the textile industry, or Eugénie. I'm not entirely sure what kind of discharges were being blamed in your case, but but interestingly, you also talked about plastic pollution, actually, in this case, because the water is not consumable, and therefore people are forced into using plastic bottles, and therefore again could be blamed for the pollution they absolutely do not create and are a victim of. So that's really been interesting to think about all this with your different projects, ongoing projects. I do not want to take too much time. If there are questions from our attendants, please put them in the chat or just raise your hand, or and you can oh, and I'm supposed to stop recording, I guess. Bye-bye, everyone. No, I don't want to end meeting. How do I stop recording? Ah, here.